Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi everyone, it's a real pleasure to be back with another episode of the Resuming Debate podcast. Generally we do these every 2 weeks, but we've been on a fairly long hiatus because we don't normally release episodes during the election or during the summer. But now we're back and looking forward to releasing every couple weeks a new episode, bringing you very different kinds of conversations, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes with outside experts. We'll be from time to time dealing with some of the international development, foreign policy, human rights issues that used to be my focus under my previous portfolio. But coming up this fall, we'll also be talking a lot about the employment crisis. To kick us off for this session, I'm really looking forward to what's going to be kind of a wide-ranging discussion with my friend and colleague, Andrew Lawton. So, Andrew, great to have you here. Just a bit of an introduction. You are the MP for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Yep.
And before you entered elected politics, many people will know your background as an author, media personality, pundit. You actually wrote a biography of our leader, Pierre Poilievre. So you went from being his biographer to now being a member of caucus with him. You haven't been elected very long, and you've already had major interventions on important issues, including firearms and euthanasia. So thanks for joining us for this episode.
Glad to be here. I appreciate it. And you were kind enough to come on. I don't actually have a podcast yet as an MP, but I did like a little test balloon this summer, and you were on it, and it went over very well. So I'll have to do some more.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's interesting as an MP, you kind of experiment with different formats, right? Because we've got lots of different ways of getting the message out, and I think people like seeing what we're doing in the House, what we're doing in committee, but podcast, it's kind of the long form format, right? It's the opportunity to have longer, deeper conversations. And so I wanted to start by asking you about kind of the transition to elected life, because you've been in kind of vocations that are close to politics for, I think, most, if not all of your adult life, right? But you know, people who are outside of politics, kind of they're commenting on, they're looking at being in it, and there are things that are different about being in it. So what surprised you? What are the things that you can see now that maybe aren't super well understood or appreciated by people that are in the chairs that you used to occupy?
I think the one thing for me, and I had an intuitive knowledge of it, but I don't think I quite understood the extent of it, was how much of the MP role is not visible publicly. Like, we see question period, which is 45 minutes a day. We see periodic speeches in the House of Commons. Beyond that, when you talk about the constituency work, you see people popping up at events, but you don't know how much there is behind the scenes. And I'll say that there's a range, and I've already seen here, there are MPs that, are really hyperactive and hyper involved, and there are MPs that I, you just don't see as much in different fora. And that's not to say they aren't working in other ways, but, just navigating the bureaucracy, like, we are government employees in a roundabout way, like, figuring out who at the House of Commons to talk to when the printer's not working.
Yeah.
Like, so stuff like that, which is not the reason I got into politics, but it's part of the role. That's been a bit of an adjustment. And also just how much you need to focus and prioritize your efforts. Like, I'm someone who, I didn't come in with one singular policy that I really wanted to champion. I had a lot of things that I'm interested in and still to this day am. So figuring out, how can I be an advocate for this? How many things can I do at once? What has to go? And that is something I'm still working on. And that was like, whereas when on my show, I had 3 hours a day, that was my old talk radio show. Like, I could do within that whatever I wanted. I could cover 10 things, 2 things, depending on it. Whereas here, like, you get one private member's bill that you can put forward in a parliament realistically and have a chance of success. And, committees, I have one committee I'm on. So that's been the stuff that I'm really still navigating.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some really important points. So I think maybe it's true in a lot of vocations, but particularly true for us. Like, there are a lot of things that you can do that are work, but could be very unfocused. Right? Like, you could spend your whole day doing things that are important, but maybe aren't super directed towards goals. So I think it's really important for members of parliament to, like, all the time be asking themselves, what are my priorities? Like, what are the things I'm trying to get done, and try to orient your time towards the realization of those priorities. And it doesn't mean that they can't change or you can't be working on multiple things. And yeah, sometimes something happens in a day that you have to deal with, but it's that prioritization is important. But the other thing, like you talked about being a radio host, right? Like that's a very clear, structured reality, right? Like you go in, you're on the radio, you got to have your guests, there's and I've never done it, but I can I think it's probably easy to understand, like the set of work that's involved in that. I think a lot of members of parliament, even those that have been here for a long time, have sort of distinct conceptions of what this job is. So you have some that lean very much into that behind the scenes work, are probably less visible to the public, but are real experts on issues that their colleagues can rely on. Like there are certain people who they may not have the same social media following, but if you need to talk to someone about a public accounts issue, for instance, you know that there's someone who you can talk to about that. On the other hand, there's people who are very effective communicators and popularizers, and they are taking messages from that may reflect research done by others, but really kind of getting it out and selling it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that, one of the challenges too is that in journalism, especially these days, and especially with independent media, which is where I worked for the last 7 years, you have to be a generalist. You have to have a good knowledge about a lot of things rather than being an expert in one thing. And that there's an advantage and a disadvantage to that in politics, because you're right, you want to be someone that can really jump into a file with both feet and know that. I mean, you alluded to this earlier. You have a new portfolio now in the shadow cabinet. You now have to be the expert on jobs and employment and all of these things. But it doesn't mean you don't have this knowledge and background and interest in all of these other issues you've worked on. So, for me, I became known as the gun guy in the spring sitting of Parliament. And I've always been a firearms guy. I've done a documentary about firearms. I'm a gun owner myself. But I had this viral moment. And that is the thing that a lot of people know me as an MP. But that's just one of a range of issues that I'm interested in. And that's the challenge. So I'm not worried about being typecast or pigeonholed or whatever, because I know that I could just as easily take opportunities to speak on other things. But that's the challenge, is that, how much do I want to specialize? How much do I want to be someone that has a knowledge of a lot of things? And is there a right answer or a wrong answer, or is it really just about preference? So these are things that there's no real roadmap for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be a generalist to the degree that at some point a constituent's going to pick up the phone and call you and want to talk about what you're doing on some issue, or there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons, and you have to be engaged enough on that issue. But within our parliamentary caucus, certainly, and within the House in general, there are structures that promote a kind of specialization. The most obvious one is committee, right? You sit on a committee, you don't sit on every committee, and you're going to know the issues on that committee, more than others. But some of this is personality. It's the vocation you come from too. So you have that viral moment. We'll talk more about kind of the policy around that. But your vocation coming into this was as a communicator, right? So you're someone that knows how to get that message out very well. And there's other people, if they come from a corporate background or some other background, their expectations about the environment will be different, and probably the areas they get into will be different. Yeah,
I think so. And I love the caucus we have for that too. Like, for example, Matt Strauss, another new member of parliament, he's a physician. He was very outspoken on a lot of the pandemic overreach. And so for me, it's like I wrote and spoke about a lot of that stuff too, but it's like, I know Matt Strauss is there. I don't need to take on that issue, because I know that he's going to say everything with a lot more authority given his medical background. So I think that's the one really interesting thing too that has changed, is that I'm part of a team in a way that, and I shouldn't say that, because True North, we had 20 people by the end of my time there, and we all had a role to play. But I was one of just a handful of public-facing people, whereas now I'm one of 140 some odd public-facing people. We all have things that we can do. So I think there's a good exercise in humility there, knowing that person I may love that issue, but that person is going to be a tremendous messenger for that. I'm not needed there. I can focus on this where someone isn't going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just share on my end, when I was a new member, it's kind of funny how you end up in these areas of expertise, because I remember sending a note to the then interim leader or some of her people around her, because they had asked for feedback on what areas we wanted to work in. And I had sent, I think 5 or 6 ideas in of things that kind of aligned with my interests. And I was given a role, it was called at the time Deputy Shadow Minister of Human Rights and Religious Freedom. And it was definitely something I cared about, but it was one of a few things I cared about. And it ended up like really being the thing I was known for a long time. And it wasn't because I didn't have other interests, but it was because, so these things can kind of just be, you get invited into things, or you get put on a committee. The last couple of years, government operations, public accounts, like, again, didn't know much about that before being asked to do it. So and you'll have those experiences too, I'm sure, where you'll get invited somewhere and be like, okay, well, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and that happened as a journalist. I mean, I was invited to partake in a delegation for journalists to Taiwan, and I've been interested in the issue but didn't know a lot about it. And now that I've seen that and experienced it and was forced to look into it a bit more, I'm like, wow, like this is a really important issue. And again, it's not, top of my agenda, but when something comes up on that file, I'm going to be interested in it. And and just to your point, I would say that there is a real, like, I didn't expect to be on the Justice Committee, but I'm so glad I did, because this summer when I was talking to constituents, crime was coming up every single day. And there were a couple of big headlines in my riding this summer that really sort of reiterated the need for bail reform. And then it was a great thing to be able to sell to my constituents, like, listen, I'm on the Justice Committee. I'm going to have a direct ability to weigh in on these issues and bring solutions. So really tying things back to the people that elected me. What do they care about? Where's the overlap between my interests and expertise and their expectations? And that's helped me narrow the focus a bit.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about TEAM is connecting our constituents with other members of Parliament. So we're there to represent them, and we're their primary contact. But I've loved being able to bring colleagues to my riding who have particular expertise in certain issues. So we've talked about sort of the transition from your life before now to being a new member of Parliament. But looking back the other way, what are some things that people like me in this business, being adjacent to journalism but not being in it, maybe don't understand well, or are more likely to miss about what it's like to be in punditry journalism, and what the realities that they're contending with are?
I think it's important to know that the average person is not partisan. The average person does not care whether a political party wins or loses. They may care whether ideas win or lose, but I actually think even more fundamentally, they have an expectation, if they care about politics and government, of what it's going to look like, and they're not as concerned with the colors and stripes. And I think that's something that, being inside of a political party now, is something that I obviously have to remind myself of. And it's difficult, because we follow this for a living, and you've been doing this for longer than I have. So, we've seen what the Liberals have done, and we know that the Liberals have failed on this and that and this and that. But that is not always the most compelling. And in fact, I'd say that's rarely the most compelling message to someone who's struggling. So I think that in journalism, there is a huge amount of overlap between journalism and politics in terms of the skill set. I mean, you have to have an understanding and familiarization with the news and how the world works and how government works. You also, for committee, like, my goodness, what is that but an interview? You have to know who to call, who the experts are, what to ask them, how to go through something. And ideally, truth is the objective. But I think in politics, I can see how, if you get so focused on the narrow, really political stuff of politics, you could lose sight of the bigger picture. And that's not an accusation of people, because I think we are all here for the right reasons, but that's the one thing that I think is important for anyone in elected office to be mindful of, is that you have a team, because that's the way our system works, but that's not the way Canadians are engaging with you and the system.
So thinking back to your life as a journalist, like you talked about ideas and bias and things like that. I think it is a reality that and I think an unavoidable one, that all of us have convictions and experiences, right? So there is no such thing as the totally dispassionate, disconnected from experience human being, right? To be a human being is to be embedded in some set of experiences and ideas. And probably it is hard for. I mean, there are some journalists, I think, unfortunately, who are trying to drive an agenda in a kind of dishonest way. But if you are an honest journalist, as many are, you're probably still pulled in this tension between really feeling deeply about something and having experiences in your life that point you in that direction, and then also recognizing that part of that vocation is to be fair and provide space for different points of view. What do you think about how that is navigated often, and how you thought about that tension?
There are a couple of journalists in the parliamentary press gallery, and you get it in the U.S. from time to time, that have this, I don't vote. They have a line where they do not vote because they think that makes them more objective. And I don't think it does, because, voting is a manifestation of opinion and perspective and, priorities. It's not the cause of them. So not voting doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. It just means that no one can accuse you of being a liberal voter or a conservative voter if you do show bias in your work. I think that, objectivity is important as a journalist, and I was a bit different because I was in a more opinion-driven space,
Right.
Talk Radio and True North, which had a conservative editorial position. But I was always clear, especially when I became the editor, in differentiating between the values and the party, because you can criticize the capital C Conservative Party from a small c conservative perspective, just as a big L liberal can be criticized by a small L liberal, and all of that.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important dynamic, because there are a lot of people in media that, you can, and this was my longstanding theory. I said, the media will criticize will criticize liberals. So it's not fair to say, they're liberal, they're never going to do it. They will. But when they criticize conservatives, it's for being conservative. When they criticize liberals, it's for not living up to the ideal of what a liberal is supposed to be to them. And we really saw that with Justin Trudeau. I mean, when the media turned on Justin Trudeau, it wasn't for his values or beliefs. It was because he had failed to become what they wanted him to be. And that's where I think there is generally a double standard. And that is not a slight at individual journalists. There are a number of individual parliamentary press gallery journalists that I think do good work, but there is an ecosystem that tends towards a bias that is, I think, inherently hostile to conservatives.
Interesting. So how do you get from seeing most journalists as being, or trying to be fair?
I didn't say most, but
okay, all right, okay.
I didn't say
Okay,
either. It's
all right.
Because I think
it's a mixed bag.
You have to look at the culture in which they operate, and one of the challenges is that journalists in Ottawa live in Ottawa, and where you live shapes your reality in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think the urban-rural divide is probably one of the greatest fault lines in Canada, and I think it's more significant than language. It's more significant than East versus West.
Right.
It's cities versus rural. So, some journalists, they may have cut their teeth at a newsroom in Saskatchewan or whatever, but a lot of them, they go to school in liberal arts universities in major cities, and they have not been exposed to conservatism in a lot of ways. And I'm very mindful of the fact that I'm generalizing, but the ones that I know who I have respect for are ones that they have some connection to something that is other than the life they live now. They've got they grew up on a farm, or they have, family from this part of the country. And they at least understand the world beyond their immediate world. And I think that's the difference. And and again, you aren't responsible for your upbringing, but the point that I always raised with journalists that I've worked with over the years is that you have to at least recognize those blind spots and account for them. If there's something you don't understand, you have to go and familiarize yourself with that. And just to go back to guns for a moment, I got my firearms license having never been raised around firearms, because a firearms group did a free safety course for journalists. Because what better way to learn? You're going to come across these things in your work. And I got it, I enjoyed it, and I've been a gun owner ever since. But that was me correcting something that I didn't know about.
Success story.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty successful. But the guns are a great example, I think, of something that has just profoundly different cultural meaning depending where you are, right? In some places and spaces, the connection between firearms and human-on-human violence is automatic. It's assumed. And then in some spaces in this country, the assumptions and experiences are just completely different. And so, I mean, I think like one of the big challenges of Canada is our vastness, isn't it? Right? Like it's, I mean, we had an experience this summer. Like I was in kind of the regions of Quebec and doing French lessons, and I went to it's a forestry festival. It's kind of like the forestry equivalent of a rodeo. And it was so great to be there and experience that and realize that, like a lot of people in my province, they would have some idea about Quebec, but they would not have been able to have those kinds of experience that I had. And their ideas about Quebec are the result of kind of hearing certain voices and not hearing others. So it's an urban-rural divide, like, rural Quebec, rural Alberta probably have a lot more in common than
the rural Quebecer does with someone from Montreal.
Exactly. So it's just the geography, the difference of experience. It's I mean, it's not as easy to have those familiarization type of experiences in a place that's so vast.
Yeah, and I mean, Canada is 10 provinces and 3 territories. I don't want to say we're 13 countries, but we are multiple countries. And I use the word nation I won't use the word nation because it has a legal connotation in Canada. But
we're one political nation.
Yeah, but there are very distinct cultures within Canada, not just Quebec. I mean, an Atlantic Canadian is going to have their own experiences. Like when we talk about issues, that come on, it's like, I'm unlikely to jump into fisheries, issues that come. Again, we have my riding's on Lake Erie, so we do have some fishing stuff, but like my experiences are not connecting with that, in the same extent that others do. And people in the West have their own entirely, separate set of issues and agendas. And BC is a strange hybrid political entity. Like the culture in BC varies so much depending on where you are.
Yeah. I think at some point we should do an episode on this podcast that looks specifically at Disraeli, the 19th century British Prime Minister, because he was associated with this idea of one nation conservatism, and he talked about this problem, and there it wasn't so much geography, it was social class, right, and that basically it was like a reality of two nations occupying the same piece of land, and his brand of conservatism was about promoting a just reconciliation that recognized the place and the role of each community. It was a rejection of kind of class warfare thinking, but an emphasis instead on solidarity and reconciliation. And I think like one nation conservatism is foundational to what a lot of us believe, which is trying to pursue that national reconciliation. And it was. It's the record of conservatives at their best is finding those great moments of national reconciliation, starting with John A. Macdonald, bringing the country together in the first place. Okay, so this is good. Let's talk a bit about that viral moment you alluded to, and we've kind of danced around it a bit on firearms. There's going to be people that haven't seen it, so just if you can quickly tell people like what happened in that moment. But then I think it'd be interesting if you could explain kind of how that moment came about, like what, because you've got a lot of experience communicating. So what's all the kind of background preparation that gets to that moment of asking a question and getting a response from a minister that's quite revealing about his lack of knowledge and understanding?
So for context, there's something in the House of Commons called Committee of the Whole, which is basically I mean, you'd be able to explain it better than I can, but it's the House of Commons room, but it's not a formal House of Commons session. And you can speak to people in a pace and format that you normally see on a committee. And this is a process. We brought a number of ministers forward to talk about essentially their plans for the coming months and year. And one of them was the Public Safety Minister, Gary and Anandasangaree. Now, to go back even further, Canada right now has this incredibly disruptive and absurd prohibition on firearms that was signed into effect in May of 2020 by order in council, which means it didn't go through Parliament, banning 1,500 types of firearms, and the government said we're going to have a buyback program, and we're going to buy them back in 2 years. That was 5 years ago and 4 months, and they still have not bought a single firearm back from a law-abiding gun owner. More importantly, they shouldn't, because law-abiding gun owners are not the problem. But the government has already acknowledged it's going to be spending billions on this. They have spent millions without any results. So that was the context in which I was asking. And I wanted to go back to first principles on this and say it's not about the cost. It's about, fundamentally, does the government understand that law-abiding gun owners are not the problem? And the rule in committee of the whole is that the minister has the time it took you to ask the question to answer. So if you ask a question in 5 seconds, he or she has 5 seconds to answer. So you can actually really, really drive a very fast-paced discussion with a number of questions, unlike in question period where you get one question, one answer, maybe a follow-up. So that was setting the stage. So I wanted to basically walk the minister down a path where I was going to get him to concede that licensed law-abiding gun owners are not the problem. And what I do in journalism, when I was talking to someone on my old radio show or on my podcast, was you basically start broad and their answers will lead you down to where you want to go. But you can't start there, you have to go there. That was what I set out to do. And I know the firearms file very well, so I had different avenues that I could go. And where I was starting was, do you have a firearms license? That was what I was starting, because and I was pretty confident he didn't, but either way, if he did, I'd say, well, then that all of these things that you had to do. And I had this whole plan lined up. And then what happened was I said, do you have an RPAL, which is a restricted possession and acquisition license? And he stared blankly and asked me to repeat the question. And I knew that he didn't know what it was. I just had that instinct. And I said, okay, what is an RPAL? Right. And that's when he said he didn't know. And then from that point on, I basically had to pivot in real time because he wouldn't know the answers to the rest of my questions. I asked if he knew about the Canadian Firearm Safety Course, which all gun owners have to do. He didn't. So it was because normal, and Gary almost got punished for being decent, because normally a minister would cover their tracks and say, oh, listen, this isn't a quiz show. If the member wants to talk about but he just answered the question directly, which is I don't know. And then he eventually sort of took a defensive stance on this. Well, I've only had the job for 9 weeks, ignoring the fact that he was the parliamentary secretary to the Justice Minister. He's spoken in the House of Commons on firearms. He had no excuse to not know it. So that's a long, I mean, that took longer than the actual clip to explain.
Right. No, but I think it's good for people to understand. And I know, so you were able to actually in the moment observe his reaction and therefore pursue the point. There's a combination of sort of, you can call it decency or sort of just clarity, but also with a lack of, clearly a lack of being prepared for the job. That in the moment, oftentimes what ministers do is they just kind of issue fog to try to cover it up. Yeah. But he actually gave the honest answer, which was that he had no idea.
And
really important to his file.
And I only had 5 minutes. I ran out of time. Our Shadow Minister for Public Safety, Frank Caputo, he got up later and asked the minister to name the 3 classifications of firearm. And this is just basic stuff. And then one of the ministers, I think it was like the deputy minister or whatever, who's a bureaucrat, hands him a note because he didn't know that either. Right. Like it was bad. It was a bad day for him.
Wild.
So that clip, if I can just say, Garnet, that clip had so much penetration. Like I get stopped in the street, even by people not in the riding, about that. People saw that. It was astonishing how much that broke through.
And I think a big part of why this is important is just linking back to that question of, like, hey, if for a journalist, if you're going to comment on something, like try to really understand it. Like try to understand the experience of people for whom this is important, and there's a sense that a lot of people have, I think, that those that are making decisions about their lives are disconnected from them, don't understand them, and aren't interested in learning, right? Like if you not every member of parliament has to be an expert on firearms, but if you get the call from the Prime Minister saying, I want to appoint you public safety minister, part of your preparation should be drinking from the fire hose a bit on how firearm policy works in this country, and probably having some roundtables, conversations with people who are firearms owners.
And more importantly, someone who's appointed to that position should have some knowledge of the file. Like that's the key. I mean, this is the 11th year of the Liberal government, or almost coming up on the 11th year beginning. and this is their own policy. We're asking them about their own policies.
Yeah, totally. And the fact that he had sort of similar types of roles beforehand, but sort of what's implicit in that response is people feeling, who are decision makers on these issues, feeling it's not important for them to know. They don't need to know. And for people whose lives are affected by the decisions they make, so that I think that's a big part of why this was important. It's that kind of elitism, out of touch with the experience of those whose lives you're actually shaping with the decisions you make.
Yeah, and that was really the core point at the end of that, like why that moment mattered. It's like, if you're a law-abiding gun owner in Canada, as I am, there are 2 million of us, does the government have any legitimacy when this is the person who is responsible for taking your guns?
Right. Well, so now some of the firearms groups, they need to do, I guess, what happened to you all those years ago. They need to
get some journalists on board.
Well, take some Liberal MPs, take some ministers. I mean, I don't know. Do you know if that's been done or if there's been any updates?
I think it's been tried. I think it's been tried. I know I had I invited the minister to my gun club in my riding. I said, come down. Like, people would have welcomed him with open arms. They might have had some tough questions, but learn about it, because that's exactly the point. Is that if you aren't prepared to confront that maybe you don't know about this side, or even just know the complexity of the issue. I'm not saying become a gun lover. I'm not saying minister join the NRA. I'm saying understand that there is a culture in this country that is different from what yours is in Scarborough in the way that people in Canada relate to firearms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can think of an experience I had as an MP where there was an issue where basically I had taken a position that wasn't going to be that was maybe different from what people in a particular community in my riding would have wanted ideally, and kind of right after that, kind of for another reason, I was spending time with people in that community, and I thought that was really valuable, because you can disagree, but disagree respectfully, and people are almost always very respectful and kind face to face. If there are politicians that are that have taken positions on firearms on the other side of the issue, I think they would find, as you say, that if they said, hey, I want to check out a gun club, I want to talk to some people about why this is important to them. I think they would find people would be very respectful, and they could create a space to ask honest questions without it being kind of a gotcha. Yeah. So let's talk about another issue that you've been vocal on. It's a heavy one, obviously. The issue of euthanasia. You've spoken publicly about your own battle with mental health challenges and your experience as a suicide survivor. My sense is that often, for whatever reason, conservatives are less likely to invoke their personal experience when talking about critical public issues. And yet I think it's very powerful for you to be able to share from that experience. I guess I think it's good for our viewers and listeners to hear kind of a bit about your story. And we can link to some of the materials you've put out there that delve into that more deeply. But then also, I think it would be interesting to hear you reflect on kind of why it is important or valuable to invoke your personal experience, and maybe, if you agree or not, that conservatives have had a tendency to do that less, and why that might be.
Yeah, it's something I grapple with, just because I'll start on where you ended there, which is that, conservative, to boil it down into the basic stereotypes, conservatives all like facts and figures, and liberals like emotions. And it's an oversimplification, but I do think conservatives, certainly in Canada, we really value, the logical argument on some of these issues. Like firearms, for example. The logical argument is, well, yes, we know statistically law-abiding gun owners are less likely to do things, and the argument against that is often an emotional one of, look at this horrible thing that happened, and so I think that you have to accompany both together. But if you have a story, if you have something that gives that pathos, as we'd say, then I think it's important to share that, because I want people to know where I'm coming from. Because, when we talk about euthanasia, a lot of the arguments that get used against people that raise questions about are we going too far are from people that say you're heartless. You have no sympathy for people who have been through pain. So I want to say, no, I understand pain. I understand the desire to end your life because I tried myself, and I was in the hospital for 7 weeks, coming up on 15 years ago. And that, for me, gives me the legitimacy to talk about it without people thinking that I'm just disconnected from it. And I think that's the key, is that I want people to know that I have skin in the game too on this. And I don't want them to, do what I say because I went through this horrible thing in my life, but that I want them to understand why I reached the conclusion I did.
Yeah.
And in my case, I think there's a difference between people that say this bad thing happened, therefore you need to pity me, and this bad thing is an evidentiary point in this broader discussion. And I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not looking to make myself above criticism. I'm trying to tell people, hey, listen, we have right now in Canada a law that's coming into effect in 2027 where someone with only a mental illness, with no physical ailments whatsoever, will be able to get MAiD to end their life. This is coming into effect. If nothing happens, this is going to be the law of the land in 2027. And I'm saying, well, hang on. I was going through a mental illness. I wanted to end my life. I was convinced of this fact. I would have availed myself of every opportunity. If MAiD was available, I would have gone down that road. It may or may not have gotten approved. I don't know. I think I probably would have.
Under the new reality that we're at risk of being in after.
But the fact that I have recovered, the fact that I am living the life that I have now, the fact that I don't wish to end my life shows that what felt grievous and irremediable doesn't feel that way now. So that is not a take pity on me story. That is a proof point of why mental illness cannot alone be a criterion for MAiD.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you kind of explain that, because your story is kind of doing two things at once. On the one hand, it is establishing your motivations and your connection to the topic, but it's also a point of evidence, right? Like it's a case that provides evidence of, okay, here's where I was, here's where I am now, here's what I would have done under these circumstances, here's where I am now. So a story can be both, right? It can draw people in emotively, but it can also prove something.
And it has disarmed a lot of the criticism that I would normally face. And the reason I say that is, like, I've gotten a number of emails from people that disagree with me, in some cases very passionately disagree with me. But because of how I've engaged in this conversation, these disagreements are far more respectful than the emails I get on any other political issue if disagreements are. Because people are saying, yeah, you know what, I get that. Here's my story that I'm aware of. But then we can at least have the debate and we can have the discussion in a civil way, because we understand that I'm coming at this from a good faith perspective, as I believe a lot of the other people on the other side are. Not all, but some, but many.
Yeah. It would be good if in every political debate we started with the assumption that even if people don't want to share a story for whatever reason, and some people have these stories in their family that they can't share because they involve someone else's privacy, right? And so that probably on a lot of issues, people have some deep-seated personal experiences around them, and probably, I guess, if we just assume that in general, it would lead to more civil exchanges.
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
What do you think about how euthanasia is covered by members of your previous profession? There's a lot of stories that I see, stories with different kinds of edges. I think, like, the other side of the debate, the side that's pushing ever greater liberalization, they always seem to find the story as well about, the person who however it's constructed or explained, it's like there's kind of stories going both ways on it.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I don't think Canadian media has covered it to the extent that they should.
Yeah.
In every other country that has dealt with this issue, there's been a lot of coverage. The UK is a great example. They're going through a big fight about this right now, and the media are everywhere on it. In Canada, there's been this very... Like, to be honest, when I first started my advocacy around the expansion of MAiD to people with mental illness, I had some level of prominence. I was unique in the story I was telling. I got no mainstream media interview requests. at all. I think I did your podcast. I did a couple of independent media things. This was before I was in politics and got no takers on it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so that was just showing the lack of appetite to deal with this. When they cover it, there has been good coverage. Even just this morning, for example, I saw a CBC piece that was talking about a woman who, with a physical ailment, had been approved for MAiD, wanted to end her life. She got a surgery.
Ah, yes.
And then now, a year later, she is looking at, she wants to live.
Yeah,
She's living.
Grievous and irremediable, right?
Yeah.
And
the media also wrote some of the horrific stories that we've heard of the veteran that wants a chairlift and gets offered MAiD. There was a gentleman in Toronto, I think it was, or somewhere in the GTA that was basically dealing with poverty and was getting pushed in. And again, it was because of his media coverage that people rallied around this man, offered him support, and as I understand it, he stayed. But there aren't all stories like that. So the media has covered this well, but I don't think has covered it enough.
Yeah. So I guess thinking about this, the media coverage has gotten better as the reality of the situation has gotten worse, right?
Yeah, because you can't look away.
there's like just and it's really interesting contrasting with the British debate. I mean, British media is different in lots of respect. It's a more compact country. There's different kinds of infrastructure on the media and commentary side. There was I can't remember the name of it, but I saw recently just a phenomenal documentary done by a British lady with disabilities who talked about the reality in Canada. And it has struck me that it's taken like us looking at foreign people looking at us to get us to think about this topic a little bit differently. Like when I've talked to, there's a lot of countries now that have some form of euthanasia. Even the fact that here, whenever you say euthanasia, people say, oh, it's not euthanasia, it's MAiD. Whereas like in every other country in the world, it's called euthanasia. But if you talk to people in politics, people on the left in other countries in the world, and Canada's a real cautionary tale about how things can get really bad on this issue.
Well, but I remember when we used to be looking at Europe and saying, oh, we never want to go down that road, and now Europe's looking at us being like, what the heck is going on in Canada there? And that is what happens when you don't understand where you're going on something.
Yeah, exactly. I've been here for 10 years, and I've been involved in this debate in some form. When I was elected in 2015, we didn't have euthanasia in Canada at all, and people are skeptical of the idea of slippery slope arguments because, in a formal sense, okay, just because you take a step in one direction doesn't mean. But we have seen the slippery slope so sharply on this issue, where within a space of a very short period of time, it would go from like. It's going to be okay because we have these safeguards to like, why
these safeguards are unconstitutional. We have to get rid of them.
Yeah, and kind of looking for excuses and creating artificial timelines. Like you have a lower court decision that could be appealed, but then they decide to do new legislation anyways and pile on it. But there still is not, I think, enough conversation about it. Like most people now are concerned about where it's gone. Many politicians, I think in different parties, are concerned about where it's gone, but there needs to be more conversation. So Tamara's got a bill. Maybe we can end this topic if you can share a bit about Tamara's bill and what it's trying to achieve. And I think that's going to be an important moment because there will be a vote in the House. People who have all kinds of different feelings on this topic in this place will have to be counted on one side of the issue or the other.
So Tamara Jansen put forward Bill C-218, and it was actually, to be honest, going to be the bill that I did as a private member's bill, but she had a much better number and was very keen to do this instead. Had already been working on it. It brings a bill that Ed Fast, who was a Conservative MP in the previous Parliament, had tried to get championed and almost did well, almost passed. It had several Liberals, it had all of the NDP, it had all of the Greens, which at the time were, I think, 2, and all the Conservatives voted for it. But it will stop the expansion of MAiD to people with mental illness. It's a very narrow, simple, clear bill. Stop this. And I think there are 2 reasons. One is just fundamentally what I shared in my story. I don't think people who have only a mental illness should go down the MAiD road. And the other part of it is that the Liberals put that in place with the promise that they would deal with some of the tricky conversations later. And that never happened.
Right.
They've not done that, which is why they've delayed this.
Yeah.
But we do not, as a country, pass legislation and then figure out the details later.
Yeah.
We figure out the details in the legislative process. And I think that, David Lametti, who was the Justice Minister, then went on to be an advisor to Mark Carney. Now he's gone. So I think that might actually even be more encouraging because, there were, I think, 8 Liberal MPs that voted for Ed Fast bill. I've done the math here. If everyone falls where we expect they will, if 20 Liberal MPs support this, it will pass, and we will save thousands of lives in Canada.
And it's a 2-step process, right? We got to get those 20 Liberals at second reading, but then there'll be a committee process, and it will go to which committee?
Probably Justice. And so I'm championing it along.
You're on Justice,
yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. So that will be that'll be interesting too. And committees are. I was not formally a member, but I went to most of the hearings of the original back in 2015, 2016 committee that was looking at, I guess would have been started in 2016, that was kind of opening the door on this. And it was very frustrating how like the witness list was so skewed. It was like we had to hear from every subcommittee of Dying with Dignity. And like there was just a complete lack of representation from those who had legitimate concerns, and it led to a very skewed perception of the issue among committee members. So, just jumping back to the conversation at the beginning, we were having about kind of the processes around here, right? I mean, we generally say there's kind of 3 principal disciplines that inform the work we do: policy, communications, and parliamentary affairs. Policy is that behind the scenes thinking about issues. Communication is getting the message out, and then parliamentary affairs is kind of the mechanics of Parliament. Mm-hmm. So the mechanics of Parliament, the parliamentary affairs on this issue is you've got a bill from Tamara, a private member's bill. It's going to be voted on. You need to convince some Liberals to vote for it, and people who are watching who care about these issues, talk to your members of Parliament, obviously. And I think people are most responsible. Talk to your local member of Parliament first. That's the priority, is locking in your local member of Parliament to vote for Tamara's bill. What number is it, by the way? What's the bill number?
It's 218, but 218, I don't know where she is in
the
order.
Okay, that's what I mean. Yeah. Bill C218.
Yeah, C218.
And then after that will go to committee, and you'll have hearings on it. So that will be an opportunity for, and you might have a case where people vote for it at second reading and don't at third reading. So you need to have more conversations, have those witnesses come in. So
yeah, and I've started an advocacy campaign around the bill as well, which is centered around my story, but I wanted to invite Canadians to share theirs, and that's at igotbetter.ca. And it's basically I got better from this, and I've invited people to share their stories. We've got a bunch, and we're going to roll those out in a way this fall when the timing is appropriate.
Yeah, neato. So we'll link to some of those materials. I mean, the firearms viral clip, as well as the work you're doing on this very important issue. So we've talked a bit about like what got you here and some of the process issues. We've talked about firearms. We've talked about euthanasia. What else are you working on? How do you feel your days?
Well, I'm working on a private member's bill, but I'm not ready to announce it yet. So I've got a relative.
I won't tell anyone.
Maybe later.
Yeah.
I've got a relatively decent number. I think I might be able to get it actually. In probably in the spring. So we're working on that.
So let's before you go to the next thing, let's just talk about the mechanics of this for people that aren't as
familiar. Yeah, because I still don't know it.
Right. So like one big event for members of Parliament at the beginning of every Parliament is there's the random draw for who's going to be the order in which members of Parliament can put forward their bills. And it's crazy in some ways. It's something so important is random, right? You work hard, you get elected, and you might have an opportunity right away to bring a bill before Parliament and have it debated and voted on. Or you might not. It's
not based on seniority. So you could be an MP in your 5th term, but if you keep drawing 300, you're never going to get a private member's bill.
So I had a bad draw the last 3 parliaments and never really got a chance. Now you can also sponsor a Senate bill. So I had some success moving ideas forward by sponsoring Senate bills. But in terms of putting forward your own bill, but I got a pretty good draw this time as well. I'll be in. And they're kind of released in groups. So right now, like coming up right away will be the cutoff for the first 30. So the first 30 members in that draw will have bills up, and there's a rotation that'll go through them, and then they'll add with another 15, and then they'll add, I think another 15.
Oh, the subsequent blocks are in 15s?
The subsequent blocks are in small groups, yeah. It's not on, I think it's 15. I'm not 100% sure on that.
See, I'm still learning everything here.
Yeah. There's a lot of mechanics. Of those 3 areas, parliamentary affairs is something that really interests me, is like how to use the mechanics to push issues through. So you're working on a bill. You're not in that first 30, so you're not as under the gun as some folks are, but you'll have a bill come up. You got a good draw, which means you likely will have an opportunity to bring a bill forward that will be debated. Depends on how long the Parliament goes, right? Who knows? It's a minority. But, okay, so you're working on a bill, and it's a secret yet, but stay tuned.
Yeah, and I'm also I'm working on a lot of constituent issues as well. Like that's the one thing that I'm very mindful of, is that I may have a national audience, but the people that voted for me live in one contiguous bit of real estate in southwestern Ontario, and I always have to be mindful of them. And rail is very big there, so navigating on some stuff with CN, which isn't sexy for your audience, but it's taken up a bit of my time, but it's enjoyable. I like that every day there's a different challenge. Every day there's something else I can be jumping into. I think
rail can be sexy under the right circumstances. Right?
Anyways, well, I like it. We're the railway city in St. Thomas, Ontario, so.
Yeah. So, and that's an interesting thing to think about too, as a new member, and like there's this tension between our roles a little bit. Like we're here to represent our constituencies. It's in the name, and also we're part of a deliberative assembly of one nation, as Burke put it, right? Like we, and I encourage members of Parliament as well, it's good to understand other regions of the country. It's good to be able to. Part of why I'm working on learning French is because being able to make the case for things that are important to my constituents in languages that in a language that others will hear.
Yeah, and you were up this week and spoken French in the House. Was that your first time doing that?
Well, first time extemporaneously. I've given speeches that have been written.
You were very good. You were very good.
Thank you. We'll have you back if you say more nice things. So how do you see that as someone? You've got a bit of a national profile. How do you see that kind of tension between a member of Parliament for Parliament, a national Parliament, but also representing your constituents?
I think the key is that the constituents have to know that when I'm in Ottawa, I'm working for them. And that's the thing I'm very mindful of, is that I don't want them to think that, oh yeah, I'm in Ottawa, I'm not in the riding, and end it there. It's like, no, I'm here for the riding. And again, the messaging I've shared with a lot of constituents is that we are not outside of Canada. We are part of Canada. Problems affecting the country affect us here. Now, we have things that may affect us in disproportionate ways, or things that are more of an issue or less of an issue. But the things that I tackle nationally, I always make a point of tying it back. So crime is a great example of this. It's a big issue for me, a big issue for my riding, a big issue nationally. When I'm talking about it in the House of Commons, I'm always clear to bring up local examples that will tell my constituents that, I'm solving this not just for the country, but for us here too. And I think that's key as well. And a lot of MPs do that to some degree. Now, look, I mean, if I am ever, dealing with something on foreign affairs, that may be something that's harder to sell. But, trade with the U.S., well, great. We've got a lot of manufacturing in my riding, so everything ties back to them. So it's always making sure that I'm drawing that direct link. And even on the firearms thing, I've got a ton of gun owners in my riding. I've got a great gun club in my riding. That is all relevant. But, the best advice I received when I got here is that there are no votes in Ottawa. And you always have to remember the people that you work for, the people who sent you there, and the people that can decide whether you get to come back.
There's always a connection to the local community, even on things where it's harder to see. So like defense, security, foreign policy, a lot of what we do in that area is to protect our country and to emphasize a kind of vigilance against possible threats that may not materialize, but may materialize, and that we have to be ready for. The immediate things you do on that may not be immediately relevant to people in your community, but they're part of the foundational security for our country. So that's really good advice, I think, to always kind of see the interconnection between issues we work on here and the impact it has on local folks.
Yeah, and our leader did that in the Battle River Crowfoot by-election.
Yes.
He said, we have local issues that require national leadership, and whether it's oil and gas, defense. So I think there's a way to do that, but it goes back to the communications piece. You just have to make sure the people in your riding see that, and that's a key part of it. So I'm making sure they know what I'm doing. And we had a couple of constituents call about different issues yesterday. It's like, I'm in Ottawa, I had some time, call them back from Ottawa. I don't want it to be where they only see me on weekends through the year.
Yeah, and figuring out that balance on the personal life side is we're up against time a little bit, so I won't go into all that, but it's different for everyone. If you're in Southern Ontario, if you're in Alberta, if you're married or not, kids or not, but figuring out where your base is going to be, it's a big. You as new members, I mean, just looking from someone who's been here for a while, like it's a breakneck first few months. Like, you've just got so much to figure out, issue-wise, process-wise, but also like organizing your life now to be in two places, right? It's I think most people would understand this. Like the life of a member of Parliament, you got to be in two places, right? Because you need to be present in Ottawa to be effective here, to deliver on the things that constituents want pushing, and you've got to be present in your riding to maintain that connection. So.
Yeah, and I think also too, like, I get very blessed being a Southwestern Ontario MP. I can come up Monday morning, start my day, go back, at the end of the week. It's not like I need to take a whole day to travel, like some of our Western colleagues do, or ones that live in areas where it's like 3 or 4 flights to get to where they are.
Well, I do the same thing. I leave home Monday morning and get here, but except it's Monday morning at like 12:30. My flight takes off. So
so you have to basically every week give up a night of sleep to be able to do your job. But that's the way that you have the ability to spend your Sundays with your family and in your riding.
So there's lots of trade-offs in it, but it's at the end of the day, you got to be present at home, and you got to be present here. So, any final words, Andrew? Thanks. This has been a good conversation.
No, I'm excited to be here, and look, I'm still learning this, but it's a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot of stuff we need to do, and that we were sent here to do, and I'm getting cracking on it.
Amazing. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
So much. So that's our episode of Resuming Debate. Hope you tune in 14 days. We'll be releasing a new episode every 2 weeks throughout the fall. Lots of different kinds of topics. As I said at the beginning, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes with outside experts. So leave a review. We release these on YouTube as well as all of your traditional podcast platforms. So we'll be back with another episode in 14 days.